And now I'm happy to introduce our next panel. It's the final panel of the day. It is the Necropsy and Mortality Reviews with Dr. Laura Kennedy and Dr. Dionne Benson.
So here we go. When we got the schedule, Dr. Benson and I realized we're 4 o'clock, so we are like the only thing between you and your evening plans. So we're going to help you out, and we're going to move right along. So I'm Laura Kennedy. I work for the University of Kentucky for the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory. And I am the person who is responsible for the postmortem exams of the racehorses in Kentucky. And I'm just going to, Jamie Hayden asked me to talk about this and just give like a really, I tried to do it from like a really basic overview because we all come from different areas. So those of you who know any pathologists will know that the only thing we like more than our knives are our words. And so there's quite a controversy between whether we call this a necropsy, we call this an autopsy. So a postmortem exam, you'll hear it called a necropsy, you'll hear it called an autopsy, you'll hear it called an animal autopsy, all the same thing. And so what a postmortem exam is, it's a detailed external and internal examination of a deceased individual. So animal, dog, cat, what have you. So I kind of went and looked for a few definitions in the human literature. So what is a forensic postmortem? So in the human definition, it's an examination conducted to address a medico-legal objective, as opposed to the clinical or medical postmortem, which is something that is, it's clinical. It's brought to your attention by, it's either the clinician, the physician, or the veterinarian involved in the case, or the owner, the person's family. And so that is really to establish, the medical aspect of it. So forensic versus a medical. So a forensic exam is mandated by a legal authority. And so this is establishing, this is on TV. So this is establishing the identity of the individual, the cause of death. The forensic postmortem takes into account a lot of history from the case, like for a human, like looking at the scene, looking at the police report, and they are trying to determine not only the cause of death, but the type of death. Is it accidental death, natural death, homicide, suicide, that sort of thing, and also to estimate the time of death. Clinical exam, again, that's much more what we do for, if anybody has submitted an animal to a laboratory, that's much more what we're doing. We're looking for just the medical aspects of the condition of the animal or the person. And that is really to guide future decision making, whether it's for the clinician who's been making the decisions on that case. If it's for, say, with a horse, maybe it's for, for a farm manager looking at it from a herd health, or are you looking at it particularly in humans, but also in animals? Are you looking at, the relatives? Is there concerns for other members of the family? So a racehorse postmortem lays somewhere in the middle of that. It is mandated in states that abide by HISA. It is mandated by HISA that any horse that dies or is euthanized at a racetrack is subject to examination. That can be any racehorse, that can be a breakdown, it can be a sudden death, that can be a stall accident, it can even be a pony horse. And so we have those horses that die on a HISA-regulated facility, which is not only at racetracks, but also training centers. We have a lot of those in Kentucky. Or a horse that's injured and then dies within 72 hours due to that injury, regardless of where that horse is when they die. And so again, for the racehorse bone, we're talking about future decision-making, and that's what Dr. Benson's going to get to. Because I really try, it's not about the dead one, you know, I always try to tell people like that my job isn't, it doesn't end with, you know, the horse that's in front of me. It goes back to all of the other horses, not only, you know, perhaps in that environment, but just in the general population. So in Kentucky, really, really lucky to have a really excellent team to work with. You got to hear from quite a few of them already. And so one of the most important things for me for these exams is like I need to know the history, right? You can't go into something blind. I need to know what has been going on. So have this, so we need the who, you know, what horse is it? How old are they? Colt, gelding, when did it happen? Where did it happen? And so the where that it happened, not only will I get the information about like, say, which track did it happen at, but I'm also going to get information about like if this was a racing accident, whether a catastrophic musculoskeletal injury or a sudden death, you know, where did it happen? Did it happen just out of the starting gate? Did it happen at the quarter pole? And all of this can be collected for me and just makes a tremendous, has a tremendous impact on my exam. And then what happened and also how. So this is one of the things where I have, like I said, have a really, this box right here is one of the most important because I do have a really good team that really, you know, they let us know what's going on. A little closer? Okay. I tend to have that problem too. So any of these racehorses that come in, general examination that they're going to get, any horse that comes to the lab, any dog that comes to the lab, you're going to have first like the gross exam, and that's when you hear somebody say the gross exam, we're talking about the visual exam, the actual opening of the body, visualizing of the tissues, handling of the tissues. And then from that gross exam, you know, based on my history, based on what I'm seeing in front of me, I am going to then determine what tests I'm going to run. Am I, you know, I'm going to do a microscopic exam, but is this a case, is this a colitis case? Do I need to investigate this as an infectious disease? And we just keep going from there. I'm going to keep moving. So I'm going to go through a couple of the types of cases that people don't often think of when they think of like a postmortem exam program, because I think most people, when they think about like a racehorse postmortem program, they're going to think about the catastrophic musculoskeletal injuries. And that is you know, that's a big part of it, and it's a very important part of it, but it's not all of it. So one of the first things when I get a medical case in, I have up here, does a state vet need to be notified, right? And it's usually Rusty has already called me, so I usually actually don't have to alert the state vet. They've already let me know. And so that, you know, it's like nothing gets things done faster than when Rusty Ford calls and he's like, we need to make sure this isn't herpes. And I say, absolutely. So for a medical case, you know, you're looking at like, what was the medical condition, right? Like what was underlying it? Was this a colitis horse that was given antibiotics? Is that maybe what we're dealing with? But then we're also looking at like what impact could this have on the, you know, on the horses in the stable? What impact could this have on the horses, you know, at that track? And then the other thing, you know, when I think sometimes we, in the scientific community, I'll say, like, we tend to focus on, you know, what the answer, you know, like, okay, this is what happened, you know, I have, you know, this horse came in, XYZ happened, these are the lab tests, there we go, you know. But maybe that doesn't, so for me, I've answered the question about the case, right? Got it tied up, answered the question. But in some cases, like, that's not the question that the person submitting wanted to know. maybe there's something else, they want to know, whether that's, I can't tell you if it did the right thing or not, but if that is a concern, I can maybe address things a little, maybe a little more. Just really try to think about the person who's getting the report and what they might really want, and some of the things that they need. So those are the medical cases. So exercise-associated sudden death. This is my least favorite. This is everybody's least favorite case. So these are horses that were seemingly healthy, closely observed. So this isn't, some parts of Kentucky here are cattle producers who are like, yeah, she was fine. And she died last night. And you're like, no, she was not fine. And she didn't, you just didn't look at her last night. But so these horses are closely observed. These are really frustrating cases. We have a really detailed gross exam, and we also do a very detailed examination of the heart. Most of the time, though, in these, we come up lacking because it's not a physical problem that you can see on an anatomic scale. We think it's more of a biochemical, electric, whatever problem. But we're working on that, so stay tuned there. So, okay, so this is what everybody thinks of with the racehorse postmortem, right? Is that what you guys thought? Right, we've got all the students here, right? They're like, yeah, what happened to the bones? So for all of these horses, regardless of why they died, they're going to get a musculoskeletal exam. For a catastrophic case, the first thing I'm going to look at, and the thing that most people are going to think about, is I'm going to look at the affected structure. And I'm going to do like a really detailed examination of the affected structure. Really, look into it, see, throw back to Dr. Scalise, the bad step is a myth, right? There are things underlying it. So I'm going to look as best I can and document as best I can that affected limb. However, it's not always the easiest place to see things. So then I'm also going to look at the contralateral limb, so that's the opposite limb. So that's, if you're looking at, you got a breakdown on the left front, you're going to look at the right front. And I'll tell you what, the left and the right front, most cases are very, very similar. So you can say, all right, I have this injury on the left front. I think this is going to be, looking at all of the things that we know about postmortems and about racehorse injuries, 85% of them are going to have some sort of stress-related factor underlying it. So I'm going to look in the right front and see, can I see it there, right? And then, so I like this slide because I always tell people it doesn't matter. You don't have to know anything about what you're looking at, right? You happen to be looking at, these are the condyles. This is kind of the bottom of the cannon bone, and the humerus on the other side. But it doesn't matter if you know anything about anatomy, right? You've got, like really symmetric blue spots right there on the inside, right there on the inside, and on the outside, and on the outside. So they're the same, very, very similar. And then when you look at on this other side, so again, this is a humerus. It has a fracture here, but you have this red area, which is a remodeled area. It's an area of previous stress injury, right? So you have it on this one here. Oops. Right. So it's there, but then it's also here on the opposite limb. So I can get certain information from the opposite limb that I can't in the affected. So one of the other things people a lot of times will ask, what's the difference, how do you approach a legal exam versus like an insurance exam versus a regular exam? And every postmortem exam is a legal document. Every postmortem exam could be, you may or may not know if the horse is insured or not. You may not know, maybe there's no indication, say, the case of a dog. There's no indication that there's anything untoward about it. There's no legal implications, right? And then 6 months later, the owner comes back and like, well, I don't think the veterinarian treated my dog correctly, right? So now it's legal. But I did the exam 6 months ago, right? I can't say, okay, now this is a legal case. So I have to have started there with like every case, could have legal ramifications. Every document is a legal document. And, it's just like, you write down what you see, and then you have to be able to defend it, right? Has to be as objective as it can be, given that there is a good deal of subjectivity. So for the report structure for us, we start with just the visceral exam, and then the musculoskeletal exam, looking at if there is some sort of injury, and then also looking at any of the conditions that might not be a fatal injury, but just what's going on with these horses. And again, so you try to be as analytical and as objective as you can, right? So one of the best ways to do that is just, I draw out exactly what I see. It's right there. I don't really have to interpret it. I have little check boxes. I don't make these, I have students who are much more savvy than I am, but just a very clear, very simple, easy to interpret, easy to defend. So like this one here, and just another example there. So this is going to get back to, I was glad that Dr. Farmer and Dr. Brown kind of brought this up earlier, but in Kentucky, we're a little different than, say, areas where there's a much more geographically limited pool of horses. How many interstates go through Kentucky? Anybody know? How many? So you got I-65, I-75, and I-64, right? You can reach 75% of the population of the U.S. with less than 12 hours from Kentucky. And so we have a very large population of horses, we have a very mobile population of horses, and we have horses spread out across the state. So this is, you'll notice there's Dr. Farmer, Dr. Brown, myself, it's the workshop. So it is every day, every race day in Kentucky, there are horses that train at a facility that is under Dr. Brown's care, either here at Keeneland or at the Thoroughbred Center, and that then go to Churchill or Ellis or Turfway, where it's under Dr. Farmer, but then we also have the corporation. We have the racing commission go with it. So we touch so many different places, and we have a unique perspective there, and we have something where we all need to share information. So we have monthly meetings because we have people everywhere. But so yeah, really fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to complain.
No, nobody's going to complain. So then I'd also be remiss if we got most of the team in here. Had to add Dr. Mundy last minute, get him in there. Yeah, we've got a great team, and it's I always tell people, it's not about the one that's in front of you, because the one that's in front of you, you do what you can, but the one that once they get to me, what I want is for that information then to be carried forward, because there are things, if we can't carry it forward, my job is not terribly rewarding. But because we do carry it forward, especially here in Kentucky, because we do have such a great team, I do feel really confident that my work is being utilized. But I'm going to hand that off. Okay. Dr. Benson.
All right. Hello. raise that up because I'm a little bit taller than Dr. Kennedy. My name is Dr. Dionne Benson. I'm the Chief Veterinary Officer for First Racing, also known as the Stronach Group. I appreciate the invitation from Grace and Jockey Club Foundation to come and speak with you today. This is something that I believe in strongly. We do a number of these, unfortunately, in California and Florida every year, but I am hopeful that they will continue to get smaller in number because of the work we're doing. So first thing is, why do we even care about these mortality reviews? As Dr. Kennedy indicated, it's not about the horse in front of us, it's about the next one. Just to give you an idea of who usually attends our mortality reviews, what information we use, and then what are the typical cases we see. Sadly, I think we can probably distill it to about 4 or 5 cases that we see over and over again, which seems like a little bit of a failing, but also, I mean, you're dealing with a bunch of different trainers and individuals who it's sometimes difficult to reach unless you're in that one-on-one situation. So why do we care? So at the end of the day, we're just trying to improve horse safety. I always start my mortality reviews with, we're not here to punish you. You're never going to go away from this with a penalty or a fine or suspension. That's not the point of these. It is really an educational process. And in my opinion, the best reviews that I have ever had have been a discussion. We have some trainers who are really vocal and really want to talk about their concerns, and I think that is a great opportunity to do it. You've got a group of people representing all sorts of stakeholders at the track, and it is one opportunity where we are all there to listen to one another. And sometimes we find things that we can improve, and in fact, we have made changes as a result of these mortality reviews. So the goal is to review the fatalities. We have all fatalities, including catastrophic breakdowns, sudden death, medical, et cetera. Sometimes when we look at a group of fatalities, patterns emerge. We've actually seen in our facilities where we have multiple surfaces, horses that tend to bounce back and forth from surface to work, to train, and just don't have a consistent surface. Their bone doesn't seem to adapt the same. And so we've seen a lot of horses in the last couple of years who have had that pattern of surface swapping. We've also seen shoe types based on surface. So I would be really interested to see someone do a study, because when we see injuries and incidents on our synthetic tracks, we see a lot of high incidence of spider plates, grippy rubber, pour-in pads, just really specialized shoes as opposed to a very simple racing plate. So who attends for the track? I do, and usually another association veterinarian, one that works there on site, the track manager, so the person who runs the overall show, someone from the racing office. We talk about types of races, and we look at things that Tim Perkin, for example, discussed about the EID and different kinds of races and whether they are at higher risk. We actually used to see shorter races used to be higher risk at our tracks, and now it's pretty even for our tracks personally. We have the medical director, the human medical director come in, track management, and also the actual track man comes in, and then the safety steward. And then the one person I did not mention who is probably the most important is our veterinary services manager, because she keeps the notes. And I can tell you that you can do all of this really well, but if you're not keeping a good record, it doesn't show up as being done well. Other attendees are usually a representative from the stewards. We have the horseman's representative, the trainer, of course. Sometimes we have a farrier. We've had attending veterinarians. We ask jockeys and exercise riders to come in. And we've even had an owner or two stop in, because they sometimes are very interested in what has happened. This is the information we look at. Dr. Kennedy and her people like her in the jurisdictions where I work, the necropsies that they perform can be invaluable. Oftentimes we get more information from them than we can get from almost any other source. But we also review things like past performances, the work histories, medical records. And one thing we definitely do is we request the private vet's medical records, I can guarantee you they very, very rarely match what's in the HISA database. So if you don't have that information, you're missing a whole section of information that is very helpful when you're reviewing the horse in front of you. So necropsy, ideally that provides information on the cause of death. We want it, as Dr. Kennedy indicated, it ideally provides information on the contralateral limb. I can tell you that in Kentucky and California, you all are very spoiled. You get really good necropsies. That doesn't happen everywhere in the country, and there certainly are other places where it does. But I've seen some that are very truncated and don't give a whole lot of information. Sudden death, we share the medical, Dr. Kennedy's frustration with sudden death. Oftentimes we don't know. Yeah. Yeah, well, and often we don't know because they don't have actual postmortem changes. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get an aorta that has burst, or you have something that is very obvious. But usually it's lack of any other information. One of the frustrations I see, and sometimes we get in our necropsies, is EIPH for every sudden death, which a lot of that is just post-mortem changes. It actually isn't the cause because it isn't significant. And if there's another cause of death, we see information regarding colic, infectious disease, injury, et cetera. So that's really helpful. That's an example of what we see for a post-mortem summary report, the gross and histopathological changes. What information do we look at? So past performances, some of the things we find to be important and kind of that we've come away to learn that they actually are risk factors that we watch are a history of poor performance, for example. We look for certain keywords in the performance as a result of these, like veered in, stumbled, veered out, weakened. Horses stumbling out of the gate actually often have, several races later, will have issues. I don't know if it is a result of stumbling out of the gate or if they stumble out of the gate because there is something going wrong. And then high-speed furlongs, which I'll talk about because that is a very challenging discussion often with trainers. Work history, was the horse coming off a break? Has the horse been in training for a long period of time? And what is their consistency in their high-speed furlongs? So, in 1996, we worry about high-speed furlongs. And this is a discussion I have in many of the mortality reviews I have, because every time we look at a horse in a mortality review, we count the number of high-speed furlongs. So your first question is, well, what are those? So those are any furlongs that the horse does either working or racing. And why we care about those is because back in 1996, the researchers in California did a study and looked at horses that broke down. And Sue Stover, who's in the audience, was part of that study, so she, I'm sure, will be able to correct me if I am incorrect. But the way that I generally explain this is that in looking at those two groups, looking at those horses, they looked at horses that broke down. And then they looked at another horse in that race, or their cohort, and compared the number of high-speed furlongs. They compared many things, but this is one thing that has always stood out to me. But what they found was a horse with an average of 35 high-speed furlongs, or the horses that broke down, excuse me, had an average of 35 high-speed furlongs in the past 60 days, compared to the cohorts who had an average of 25 high-speed furlongs in the past 60 days. Now, what I always tell people, because we see 40s, 45, high 30s all the time in horses that don't break down. Having 35 high-speed furlongs does not mean you have to stop on a horse. What it means is once you get above 30, start paying attention to your horse more. It may be time to back off. The horse may be able to handle that workload, but that certainly is something that you should be looking at as a trainer when you are planning your horse's exercise regimen. Dr. Bramlage said it best, not all horses can handle the same amount of work. So yes, there are horses who are absolute tanks and can handle 40, 42 high-speed furlongs on a regular basis, but not all of them can. Interestingly, another pattern that has emerged is a drop-off in high-speed furlongs. We see horses that have had high levels of high-speed furlongs, and then they drop off. I don't know if that is because they're being managed differently because they're sore, if they've had other issues that have caused them to, the trainer to slow down on them, but it's certainly something that we have seen across the mortality reviews we've done. And then one of the other high-speed furlong issues we've seen are horses that have been in continuous racing and training for months at a time. We're talking a year, 2 years in some cases, and then those horses break down, and it's not really any surprise, right? You can't continue to go as hard as these horses can go for as long as they go without having damage that cannot catch up to, because they don't have time to repair it. So it's certainly something that we have seen are those 3 different patterns in horses that have had catastrophic breakdowns. And it's something we talk to the trainers about. Again, not in a way that shames them or blames them, but certainly in a way that hopefully educates them and says, this is something that you need to be aware of as you are training your horses. And you'd think that, great, so we give horses rests and then we have no problem. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because one of the other big groups we see are injuries from horses who've had a break of 90 days or more. Horses' bodies are very smart. When I was in vet school, the internal medicine specialist said horse kidneys are smarter than the smartest. The dumbest kidney is smarter than the smartest resident or smartest internist. And horse bodies are very much like that. So when a horse is out for 90 days or more, they start to lose bone mass because they don't need it, right? So if they're standing around in a stall or walking around a pasture, they don't need the same bone mass they do when they're racing. And horse bodies will lose mass where they can. And so after those horses go out on a break, almost as soon as they go out on a break, they start to lose bone mass, which means when those horses come back, they have to be treated like they're babies coming back into racing. And oftentimes we see people saying, oh, no, this horse has been in training, it's only been out for 90 days, and then they come back and they trot the horse for a couple weeks, and then they start galloping. And often those horses suffer long bone fractures or pelvic fractures in the first 1 to 3 gallops. So they barely get a chance to start working, but the problem is they haven't had time for their body to signal their bone to continue or to re-establish that skeleton that they need for work. And again, this is also based on work that came out of California, and I highly recommend, there's a Horseman's UCE that was done for humeral and scapular fractures. Amazing. And so these are the 2 major categories of postmortems we're doing on horses with fractures. It's horses that have been overworked or horses that have been underworked and not brought back slowly enough. Oftentimes I hear from trainers when they come in, well, they galloped at the farm or they jogged at the farm for a month. Okay, well, are you willing to bet the horse's life that actually happened, first off? Secondly, if they galloped or jogged on an equicizer, it's no good. They have to actually have weight on their back. So in order to actually trigger that bone building information in the horse's brain, you have to put weight on the back. So then we look at the information we get. So we look at, geez, this is really small, I'm so sorry. History of vets list, HISA records, the private vets records, and exams by regulatory or association vets. That's kind of the scope of the medical records we look at. We're looking for several things. We look for diagnostics, joint therapies, use of NSAIDs post-work, post-race regularly. I've actually had several discussions with trainers who their practice is to, after every work and after every race, give bute because they don't want the horse to feel pain. Pain is an important signal to let you know that a horse is hurting. They can't tell you they're hurting, and if they look perfect, you're not necessarily going to know they're hurting. So giving bute or Banamine or any NSAID can mask that pain. And for those of you who don't believe that NSAIDs are powerful, I have a video of a horse with a condylar fracture that looked perfect after NSAIDs. So I firmly believe that NSAIDs can mask. And then use of antibiotics in colitis cases without probiotics or biosponge, those are some of the things we see. I've seen many cases recently. I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, where people will do Russian roulette of antibiotics. They'll do one after the other, constantly changing, and then they end up with a horse with colitis. So it's just like basic first-year veterinary medicine. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with doing diagnostics, and we routinely encourage them. But what I get concerned about is when you have diagnostics that show you that the horse has a problem, and then we've seen people go on. So I'm not sure if that is a discussion that the attending vet hasn't had with the trainer, that there's an issue in this diagnostic, or if, for example, last month I had a mortality review where I had a trainer who gave corticosteroids 2 weeks before a race, so they were just about to come off, in a knee, and they had radiographed the knee 3 days before the race. The knee had obvious radiographic changes that were extremely concerning. But I had the vet there, and they said, well, but the horse was sound. I said, well, wouldn't you expect it to be sound? You gave it corticosteroids 2 weeks ago. That's exactly what you would expect to happen. I said, so you can't use if you're going to use your diagnostics, don't ignore them. I mean, completely lean into them. Joint therapies, I have no problem with judicious use of joint therapies. In fact, I've told many trainers in some cases, why aren't you injecting this horse? Well, you guys don't like that. No, the problem I have is when you're giving it every 2 months, every 6 weeks, without doing any diagnostics. And then use of NSAIDs post-work, post-race, we talked about that. Ooh. Medical records, so some of the things I've seen that are very interesting, and I am hoping our cardiologist in the room is paying attention, who's doing our sudden death study. I actually have seen several cases where a horse suffers a sudden death that has a history of severe respiratory disease prior. I'm not saying that every horse that has severe respiratory disease is going to suffer a sudden death, but I wonder if there is a connection, and if previously we had a lot of cases where they would have incidental necrosis in the heart tissue. I'm wondering if that's actually not so incidental. So I think it's something that we will maybe in 5 years, 10 years, fingers crossed, have a much better idea of how to predict these sudden death cases, because they are very frustrating. Yeah, I've seen many colitis cases where you change antibiotics multiple times, and that is never on the trainer. The trainer's not making those decisions. So that's why it's important in some cases to have the veterinarian come in and have that discussion and explain, why are you changing antibiotics constantly? Why aren't you doing some preventative stuff to prevent those colitises? So other information we use, race replay, shoeing information, track information, horses changing tracks. We're very fortunate in California, in Southern California. Our horses tend to be on an island, and they don't change locations a lot. We don't have the same situation in Southern Florida. And I definitely believe that there is a contributing factor when a horse changes surfaces continually, that they can't, and changing tracks, make no mistake, changing from, one facility to another can be significantly different depending on what the makeup of the track is. And then a physical map of the track is appropriate, is important, because in some cases we've actually found that there was a post in the middle of a path that a horse ran into that we could get rid of. It's important to know those things. Again, often the trainer provides great feedback about what was happening with the horse. We try to discuss the one bad step. I will tell you more often than not, despite what everyone hopes, that is still a myth that is alive and well. I will say I have had a horse that's jumped another horse that fell and got injured. I do believe that is a bad step, but just running down the track and you know, they're not having a bad step. Most of them are pre-existing conditions. One of the most common comments I hear is the horse was the soundest one in the barn, which terrifies me and makes me want to go look at every one of their horses. I often think this is an issue where we have a bilateral lameness, so the horse doesn't look obviously lame on one limb. It's just kind of short and choppy, and they're reading that as being even and sound. So I don't always think it's nefarious. Sometimes I think it's just lack of information. And I definitely have that discussion with people. I think, again, the whole point of this is to educate people. Sometimes we have trainers bring up things that we can do to improve safety. We've removed gates from horse paths, padded things. I will say I very rarely also make it through a day of reviews without someone complaining about the track. I agree the track is a living being and contributes to every issue. They have to be running on something. Now, there are great tracks and there are tracks that are definitely harder on horses, but you have to kind of train around the track because we can't give everyone a perfect track every day. It's impossible because they are subject to weather. Southern California, we've done a little bit to change that with restricting access to the track when it rains heavily. And the other thing I will say, you know, in defense of the regulatory vet a little bit, I have yet to have a trainer come in and say, you know what, I took a shot and I shouldn't have. I've never had a trainer say, it's my fault, it was my bad, I did it. So they're always very surprised, and it was never a horse that they intended or that they expected to have it. So when a regulatory vet comes in and scratches a horse, I have a little bit of sympathy knowing that the other side of that is I have yet to have a trainer actually say that, even when I can see based on the records that they probably were pushing the horse, that doesn't happen. So again, typical cases, horses that haven't had a break, horses that are just coming off a break, and horses with aberrations in their high-speed furlongs. Horses training on multiple surfaces, horses with strange shoes on synthetic surfaces. Again, we've just seen too many of those, and I have 2 tracks with synthetic surfaces. And these patterns, I think, are going to emerge as we go on, because we're starting to see, I think, of the 10 horses that I reviewed with fetlock abnormalities at one of our tracks, or fetlock injuries at one of our tracks, 9 of them had multiple surfaces in the last 90 days, whether it was coming from another track that they'd been training at, or whether they had been jumping between the synthetic and the dirt. So I think that will be an interesting idea in the future. The other thing I would really like to see, if someone can get this done, is I can only see the fatalities that a trainer has had at my tracks. So I know that there are trainers out there who have 100 horses in training, and they have one issue at my track, and that's all I see. And they're doing a great job. But I also know that there are trainers out there who've had issues at multiple tracks, but I can't find them. So I can't have that overall discussion of training practices because I don't know. I mean, I know through rumor and everything like that, but to actually have a national list of fatalities that's searchable for trainers so we can have those overall discussions instead of having each one in a vacuum would be incredibly helpful. So again, the goal of the mortality review is to improve outcomes for horses in the future. We're hoping to educate people. We want to review cases and look for trends. These are some of the trends I've found in my reviews, and we never, ever, ever punish. So hopefully that was fast enough and we got you guys out early. So thank you.